Сегодня у нас настоящая британская классика от нашего преподавателя из Лондона Пола. Ветер, дождь и, конечно же, бесконечные разговоры о погоде. Почему англичане так любят поговорить о прогнозе? Смотрим видео.
Hi guys, welcome to class. Thanks for coming. So today, what are we talking about? Well, usually it's quite a mundane conversation, but it's a conversation that we have every day, and it's called the weather. In the UK, this is a very typical conversation when we're talking with people that, maybe it's a professional capacity, or we're making a small talk. We're just trying to have a chat, maybe even like an icebreaker. The problem with the UK is that the weather can sometimes be very unpredictable. So usually the conversation can be quite bleak because we're talking about it being cold or being wet through rain. And that could be at any time of year. So what we're going to talk about today is some of the conversations that we might have, some of the vocabulary that we can use and how we might use it as well. So firstly, as we talked about, this is a normal run-of-the-mill, everyday kind of conversation. It's not controversial. It's a pretty safe topic. You're unlikely to upset anybody by talking about what the weather conditions are like. It's not really an opinion. We're dealing with facts. So either it's raining or it's not, or it's sunny or it's not. And of course, in the UK, we reserve the right to complain about the weather, no matter how good or bad it is. So for example, if it's raining heavily, we're going to complain. But we know that our gardens and our parks desperately need rain to avoid droughts. If it's too hot, we can also complain about that as well, because it can be stiflingly hot. It can be very uncomfortable if we're going to work on the tube or on the buses. It can be very cramped, and the heat from a hot summer's day can make it unbearable. So it's not controversial. It's a quick and easy subject. And it's something that we have in common. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, you can't really avoid the weather. Even if you work from home, as a lot of people do now, and they just look out the window at it. So, favorite weathers. It's easy to assume that everyone likes the same sort of weather, but it's not true. I'm pretty predictable. My favorite weather, sunny, blue sky and warm. Not too hot, because then, as I mentioned, it does get a little bit uncomfortable. And no one wants to get sunburned. What's my least favorite weather? Well, even though I mentioned before about how fundamentally important rain is for us, I don't like it. I never used to enjoy those cold winter days in London where the wind was swirling and the rain was lashing down. What kind of weather do I enjoy watching, but not actually being outside in? Thunderstorms. That's my big thing. I love nothing more than sitting at a window watching a thunderstorm at night with the crack of the lightning in the sky, the roll of the thunder. It was something very special that I've always enjoyed ever since I was very little. Okay, so when we talk about the weather, we need to have lots of vocabulary, because if we just have very limited vocabulary, sunny, raining, then the conversation dries up and gets a bit boring. There's lots of different types of weather as well, not just the predictable ones. Hurricanes. So what's a hurricane? Well, a hurricane is like swirling wind, quite dangerous, can be known to pick up cars and houses and fling them around the place. They can be fatal for some people as well in certain parts of the world. In London, don't really get that many hurricanes. Might get a bit windy, but that's about as bad as it gets. Could have a gale, which is kind of like a strong wind, or a storm, as I mentioned before. So a storm might be with thunder or without, with heavy rain. It would have lightning. It's really cool to watch it, but not so cool to be out in it, and could be quite dangerous as well. When it snows, we might have a blizzard. So that's pretty unlikely in the UK, but you get some parts of the world where it's a blizzard, where it's real extreme snow. Really nice if you're out skiing in a nice ski resort and there's a blizzard at night, because when you wake up in the morning, all the snow has settled nicely. There might be a shower. So instead of heavy rain or normal rain, it might just be a little bit of light rain for 10 or 15, 20 minutes. We would call that a shower, something quite light. Of course, we have clouds. So the big white fluffy things that we see in the sky, it might be a cloudy day. I don't like it when it's cloudy. I prefer a nice blue sky. And of course, the old favorite, sunshine. So there's nothing better than waking up in the morning and you open your curtains and you see that glorious golden sunshine drenching the world all around you. We have thunder as well. So we have a very noisy weather. And of course, as I mentioned as well, we have lightning. So these two would create a thunderstorm. What adjectives can we use to back up these nouns? So if it's a storm, we might say it's stormy. If there's clouds, we would say that it's cloudy. We can have overcast as well. What do we mean by that? Well, that's kind of almost as if it's about to rain. Oh, it's looking very overcast. So those clouds look a bit grey. They look a bit dark. It just sounds like it's going to rain, or looks like it's going to rain. Of course, when the sun's out, it's sunny. We might even use the word clear as well, a clear sky. So effectively, no clouds. We might also say it's fine. So a fine day would be a sunny day. A bad day, self-explanatory. So probably wet, windy, maybe even worse, maybe a thunderstorm. That would be a bad day. Bleak, if the weather looks a bit bleak, could be anything from foggy to lashing down with rain. So some really good adjectives. What other nouns can we use, though, to describe the different types of weather that we can experience? So, of course, we have the wind. Wind is obviously useful in many ways, but it can also be a little bit dangerous too if it gets a bit strong. Then we can have a breeze, which is wind, but maybe a slightly softer, lighter kind of a wind. Fog. This is another one that can be quite dangerous if we're out driving, or maybe if we're walking and the fog is quite thick. So it's almost like a smoke and we can't really see where we're going. A mist. If something is misty, what does that mean? Well, it's kind of like a fog, but it's almost like a wet fog. Then we have dew, but dew is a bit different because dew is something that we find on the ground. So in the early morning, we'll notice maybe in a park or in a garden that the grass is a little bit wet, it's a little bit damp, and we would call this a morning dew, D-E-W. Sleet, that's my absolute least favorite weather, because if you have snow, that's one thing. You can build a snowman, you can have a snowball fly. But sleet is kind of like wet snow. Drizzle, it's like a lazy rain. Hail, well, it's when these little stones come firing down. Sometimes they can be quite big as well, hailstones. And frost as well. So usually in the winter, when it's biting cold, maybe it might not be necessarily snowing, but there might be frost. So it's almost as if something has frozen. Sometimes you get frost on cars. You might have frost on your wall. You might have frost on the floor. Frost everywhere. So what adjectives can we use for that? So when there's wind, it's windy. When there's a breeze, it's breezy. When we have fog, it's foggy. So you see that the adjectives, they all end in Y. When there's mist, it's misty. And of course, you guessed it, when there's frost, it's frosty. But what other adjectives can we use? Perhaps to talk about the temperature. So we might say that it's hot. We also might say that it's dry or it's warm. Sometimes it can get too much though. And when it reaches 30 or 40 degrees Celsius, we might use the vocabulary, the adjectives, boiling, scorching, baking. And then, of course, we have the other side of it. So when the weather is cold, it might be freezing, or it might just be chilly. So chilly is when it's cold, but it's not too cold. It's not freezing. So what verbs do we use, and what examples can we use to describe these verbs? So to rain, well, as we all know, it rains a lot in England. To pour, it's pouring. So it's pouring with rain. So there's lots of rain. It's very heavy. Take your umbrella. You're going to need it. To drizzle, it's kind of like, as I mentioned, almost like a lazy rain. It's not raining heavily. We might dismiss it and just say it's only drizzling now. It will probably stop soon. To hail. So hailstones can be quite dangerous. When it hails, you should try to be inside. And if you have a garage, you should try to put your car in there. To sleet, my least favorite. It's sleeting and it's very cold. It's very wet. It's very damp. It's very uncomfortable. To shower. Well, we might look up at the skies and see that it's only a shower. It will pass soon. To snow. Well, most of the time we like it when it snows, but it can cause lots of inconvenience. We might say it's snowing hard right now. To frost. It frosted last night. You remember when the frost was on the roads or the frost was on the cars? Again, can be quite dangerous. The thunder. It's thundering. There's going to be a storm. To blow. So the wind is blowing hard. To cloud over. So this means when the clouds come out and cover the sun, we might say, look, it's clouded over this afternoon. What other verbs can we use and how would we use them? So it's foggy. It's misty. It's lightning. It's humid. That's when we talk about how it feels. Maybe it's difficult for us to breathe. Temperatures. What language can we use to talk about temperatures? We measure the temperature in two different ways, with Celsius and with Fahrenheit. In the UK, we used to measure the weather just in Fahrenheit, but now it's mainly with Celsius. So if we talk about Celsius, it's the lower number. So when it's 30 degrees Celsius, we know that it's a very hot day. Obviously, we have the word degrees. So that's the number that tells us what the temperature is. So 30 degrees Celsius, or if we use Fahrenheit, it might be 80 degrees Fahrenheit. We always use the word degrees. A barometer, that's how we measure the weather. What about expressing probability or even possibility of the weather? So for example, the word possible. Possible that it might rain tomorrow. We're not sure. Probable. Snow is probable next week. Unlikely. It's unlikely to be sunny tomorrow. Impossible. It's impossible that it will stop raining in the next few minutes. Likely. It's likely to rain at any moment. Highly unlikely. The British summer is highly unlikely to stay dry the whole time. But one final note, and it's one of my favorites, although I have to be honest, I don't think I've ever heard anybody use it, is an expression when we talk about when it's raining a lot, it's raining cats and dogs. So of course, it doesn't mean it literally, it just means that it's raining very heavily. Okay, guys, that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed the weather lesson.
Чтобы познакомиться с нашими преподавателями поближе, улучшить свой английский, разговорную речь, записывайтесь к нам на уроки. У нас, кстати, есть бесплатное занятие пробное.